عافية.
صباح الخير للجميع.
Hi Chris هناك.
مرحبا يعطيكم
Good
العافية.
morning everybody.
مرحبا بكم في
We
يوم
would
ثاني.
like to welcome you on the second day of the 19th annual conference of muwatin Institute.
رح نحكي فيها على
We are going to talk today of a subject, the least that is said about it is interesting, which is the issue of the youth. My name is Ibrahim Ash-Shaqaqi. I'll be facilitating this session, and therefore I have absolute authority over the past 2 hours.
رح أعمل تقديم صغير
I will give a quick introduction to the session in 10 minutes, and then I will give the 3 speakers 20 to 25 minutes to give their interventions, and then we will have 45 minutes for your questions and comments.
موضوع الشباب
The question of the youth.
في صار يأخذ في الفترة الأخيرة شوية.
The question of youth started to be used in kind of passive way recently, like many terms in the Palestinian society, because in their absolute existence they can be positive or negative, they're neutral. Peace, for example, can be considered as positive or neutral. However, within the Palestinian context, it has a different meaning. Pragmatism, moderation are also among those words in which gained other pejorative meanings in the Palestinian society. So this pejorative thinking of the youth stems from different points. The other term is ambiguity. Ambiguity regarding this term, are we talking of the Palestinian youth in Lebanon or the mobilized Palestinian youth in the West Bank and the West and Gaza, the youth in the diaspora? But the other ambiguity is the social ambiguity. Who is Ibrahim? Who is Hafiz? The single and recently married people understand this. When somebody goes to ask a woman hand, the family of the bride-to-be do not ask him direct question, but they go and ask all of the people around him, because we have this curiosity to know what is the origin of these people. And this is one of the questions: who are you? And the other question is the fluctuation. We don't like the fluctuation. Someday the youth go and are mobilized in a strong demonstration conference, and 10 days nothing. So there is no continuum. The third point relates to representation and youth fragmentation within the youth group. The youth are rotating. One of them goes to a conference in Turkey, in Tunisia, in Amman, and then they facilitate a conference in Muwatin. Each one of them has a form. It's like they say in a proverb in Arabic, the youth just keep hanging around. So who are you? Who do you represent? These are many questions that have contributed to this lack of clarity regarding who the youth are. There is another point which recently took place, which is smart handling by Palestinian security apparatus to the youth mobilizations to divert attention from the core issue to formalities. As an example to this, there was a demonstration relating to return to the negotiation table. Have you been watching TV broadcast recently? It was mostly about the right to express opinion, moral and ethics of demonstrations, and this increased the level of ambiguity relating to the youth. But in the same time, we have clear-cut stances of the different youth mobilizations. For example, who dared raising the flag of Palestine over Beit El settlement other than young men and women when all of the Palestinian
واللي طلع
factions were totally silent about negotiations, who said that we are against any concessions in negotiations,
المنطقة اللي فلسطين
who
عايشين فيها.
refused that
مين اللي رفض
an Israeli war criminal
فلسطيني جماعي
does
الشعب
not
الفلسطيني
profane Palestinian holy sites, who talks to the Palestinian diaspora with all of its components. Therefore, it is quite difficult in 1 or 1.5 hours to cover all of the issues
ولكن
relating
احنا
to youth.
محظوظين انا وياكم
But we are fortunate today is that we have 3 young
على في هذه
people
الجلسة
in this session
عندهم خبرة
who have the
تجربة في أعماق
experience
مختلفة،
in different areas.
تجربة أكاديمية
Academic experience, social experience, partisan experience,
وبالتالي
and therefore
ما عندي شك
I have no doubt that this session will be quite interesting and
يحكي عن
stimulating. Now I will give every intervenant the opportunity to express himself, and by the end of every intervention we receive questions from the public. I will start this session with the first speaker, Basil Al-Araj. Basil is a pharmacist
وباحث في التاريخ
and researcher in the Palestinian oral history. He's been working in Palestinian affairs.
عنده ميزة
He has an advantage
قليل عند الشباب الفلسطيني
which is rarely found among the Palestinian youth today,
إدمان القراءة
which is addiction to reading,
بالذات قراءة التاريخ
especially history reading. He understands that in order to view the future, you have to learn from history. And this
المداخلة تبعته
point that Basil has will increase our interest in his intervention among his friends. We call him the Fanon of Palestine. Had anybody seen the interview in Palestine TV? He's Fanon of Palestine and the one who makes officials sad.
باسل تفضل معك الشيء.
So those who laughed are those who follow up youth issues. Basil, you have the floor.
صباح الخير.
Good morning.
شكرا إبراهيم.
Thank you, Ibrahim, for this introduction.
بجوز ما تسناش الوقت كثير.
Probably I did not have quite time to write my paper in a coherent time because of recent events I had to go through. However, I will try to read it as coherently as possible and respond to some of the questions raised by Ibrahim.
ورقتي عن
My paper is about youth mobility and the tensed space. It depends a little bit on Badiou theories.
غير منتمي للأحزاب الحركية.
The non-partisan youth who are not affiliated to traditional political parties are the main players in the Arab Spring revolutions. It is a new happening in the history of social mobilization and revolutions with the forms of organization of protest movements. The structural transformation in the will of emancipation among Arab youth to make their demands social demands. In the beginning, the question raised by Ibrahim is important. Who are the youth? This is a question that must be answered. The concept, the definition, and the methodological indication, although the signification of youth appears for granted and simple, however, controlling and specifying the concept is very difficult, and all of the attempts to specify the definition are purely formal. Based on this, we can study the youth as a group of people with certain biological and psychological traits, a number of individuals who are within a certain age group, a number of legal legislation and procedures, a number of behaviors or mindsets. So briefly, they are social and life facts, but they are also a political fact.
الشباب ظاهرة اجتماعية.
Youth are also a social and historical phenomenon whose roots stem from the transitional movement in which the youth live, because they are corely cultural and not natural. That is, they are not hereditary, and they're different from a youth to another and from a group to another, even within the same society. Bourdieu has elaborated over this issue in quite details. However, Borges has an important book which he wrote, and Birzeit University are the Borges specialist. He has an article about La jeunesse n'est qu'un mot, the youth is only a word. I'll start with the story of youth is only a word. The sociological analysis of Bourdieu links this definition to the age group in which youth is just a word. And he says that the limits between age or age figures are unbased because we do not know where the youth age or senior age begins. In the same concept, we cannot say what is riches and what is poverty, and therefore the youth are social products that develop over history and take the forms which translate the existing social structure around them. So Bourdieu deals with youth and senior age in relative forms. We are young or seniors in relation to other things, and therefore this is a reproduction of a certain system, in which case everybody reserves their status. So these are not given facts, but they are a social construction, and he concludes that the relationship between biological and social age is very complicated. In order to give legitimacy to the conclusions of his theory, he had to go back to some of the anthropological and ethnological research, and he went to an American sociologist research.
هذا يعني نقدر نقول من اطار النظري.
This is the theoretical framework of the concept of the youth. There are 2 points we need to talk about which depend to Bourdieu, which is the habitus and the definition of symbolic violence and authority, the Palestinian youth mobility. Here, to prepare my paper, I had to read the non-affiliate of Colin Wilson, in which I understood the world without values, and a story of Hemingway about the gambler, the nun, and the radio, as if there is a horrifying statement which is religion is the opium of people, but now it is the opium of the people in addition to patriotism. What about sexual intercourse? Isn't it another opium? Drinks and so on. Had Hemingway been living today and seen Facebook and Twitter, he would have taken the radio off or added him to the radio. But what is absent is the same values that create a great civilization are the same values that can destruct this civilization. So these are the type of opium and how you use them. If we go for a study which is not published by Tariq Khamis, who dates back the youth mobilization movement in the West Bank from the 25th of September 2010, when a group of 100 young people demonstrated against the siege on Nabi Saleh, and then on the 5th of June, which turned into the independent youth movement, and all of these frameworks, you were united under Palestinians for dignity with a clear objective. This experience ended, but with the beginning of the formation of this framework is to refuse any return to negotiations. And we remember the demonstrations against the potential visit of Mufas. So the experience of Palestinian youth movement is not dissociated from its historical context and cannot be disengaged from any other youth experiences. And it came through different associations and through the first Palestinian Youth Conference. If we go back to the experiences of the youth in the 20s and the 30s, and if we read Omar Saleh memoir, or there was a memoir, we noticed that there was a beginning of formation of a certain youth type. And strange thing is that it was also influenced by the Egyptian experience and with the emergence of the Palestinian Revolution that began with the formation of the Fatah movement, and the preceding preparations were also affected by the by the Egyptian experience. Sorry, but I will try to consider the youth mobilization from another perspective, because since there's a problem in the definition of youth, there's a problem in that definition of youth mobilization. It appears like as an, but I would see it as an existentialist depression that has affected a group of the society, and this was a question raised at a certain period and went into all direction. I cover from a big problem about limiting the youth to Ramallah or to some personalities from a certain bourgeoisie or upper middle classes, because but the mobilization is all over. There is a Dutch psychologist, Broski, who defines the existentialist depression as the psychological status to which individuals reach as being encountered with existentialist questions like life, liberty, and death. But he is different from other theoreticians of depression, that he sees that this case is positive and it talks about the existential crisis and not the psychosomatic depression, because he thinks that at this stage there's dismantling of the defeated interior that was raised in a certain social context in an article on violence and non-violence by Khalid Oud Atala. He describes the Palestinians and he says, we as Palestinians, it's like someone who walks on a road and finds a transfer because there is public works on this road, and he goes to alternative it, and after penetrating this other road he wants another transfer, and so on. So we can see this big event which is called Oslo, that we have reached a stage where people who have conscious and good readings of the facts that each one of us is looking for a meaning of his life. There's a crisis to seek a meaning, and part of these problems that are expressed by procedures with some supremacy of certain virtual societies or stereotypes about a question about the meaning of life. In the past, the meaning was clearer with some problem, and we assumed that our existence is related to the other who we resist. But it became clear, but it was clearer and defined with certain social and cultural structure that is linked to its meaning. But with all of these transfers and transitions and shifts, now we have this dilemma of finding our directions, and this becomes more difficult if we want to lay down rigorous conditions to answer this question. So anybody who would like to exit this puzzled road will have to find the way out of the puzzle, and therefore we define our tools of resistance that against the colonization. But there was this dichotomy between the colonizer and the colonized. But in our case, it was passively translated, and then we try to find a way out of this puzzle, which is a necessity for the people. The youth mobility is also a type of exiting the habitus as defined by Bourdieu, which is the internal disposition by the society. It is a number of common behaviors of a group of individuals emanating from the same social milieu and mindset, and it is a result of the integration of the subconscious or internalization of the subconscious of certain forms of social behavior, and it is rebel against violence, not necessarily direct violence, but symbolic violence and authority. And Bourdieu here differs from Marx in defining what is symbolic, because the Marxism did not delve into the details of symbolism. However, Bourdieu speaks more about it and says it's much harsher in its influence on the society.
حاول الشباب أن يجدوا
The
أفكار
youth
في
have
مشروع
attempted to
تعرض
find
سائد
answers about to the question raised through different means, even through action and self-learning. Many of the action was not an answer rather than seeking the answer. The mobility over the past period in most of its forms aimed to reconstruct the national collective values, to reconstruct the construction of the people which began to collapse in the protective shield operation, as Walid Daqqa wrote in the article about melting the conscience. And the youth upheld to three issues: the right to return. These are the demands not only for the youth in Ramallah but also in the countries of siege or in the diaspora, and those who try to go across the boundary to revive the right to return and on the memory of the Nakba and Naksa. The youth also attempted to reintegrate the symbol and reactivate the question of Palestinian prisoners, historical Palestine, because all of our Fedone have disappeared after Oslo, and those who says, what is the nation? What Palestine are talking about? West Bank and Gaza? Or the 27,000 something square kilometers, because all of our fait accompli have fallen down. And the definition of the Palestinian people. Today there is a statement, a dominant question: what is the Palestinian people? Who are we? Who is our what is our identity? What are we doing? And there were some activities organized by the Palestinian youth in confronting the so-called disciplinary measures or intervention like normalization, which is highly condemned today in the society, and some of the youth condemn normalization but they do not understand the meaning thereof. All of these are part of the militant activism of the youth, not only by the youth but by other people, and the external funding, which is the online accusation. There is an officer in the Palestinian intelligence service after demonstration against the youth conference, the oldest of whom was 17 years old. This officer was shocked from the intelligence service. You've been saying that these youth are American, CIA, USAID, they are sitting on the table and you're just striking them. Most of the youth mobilized to paralyze the idea of external funding, especially from USAID, to eliminate this acculturation, social acculturation that is taking place in our society, and to regain our fait accompli after Oslo, and to not allow them to go into oblivion.
Okay, thank you, Basil. It is so important what Basil was saying, because some people can see that the first part is the theoretical part, and why do we tackle such a thing? Those who are close to the youth movement can see how far it is from the theoretical, and how most of its focus is technical and superficial. Should I go this way or that way in the demonstration? I would call it, should I call it historical Palestine or occupied Palestine? So what Basil is doing, if we are here, Basil is taking us to the other place. Basil is talking about something that deals with the core of the youth and what the youth are. So when he is talking here, then we have to reach to come to a common ground, and it is not easy to tackle things in an operation like external funding and normalization and other things. These are complicated, and to present them this way is just an opening preface for this session. The second speaker is Hafid Omar. Hafid Omar is an activist. He's well known as a designer of posters, political posters. One of them is very well known, Salt and Water for the strikers, striking prisoners. I know him some 20 years ago when we were in the first 5th or 5th grade. Some people know him. I remember he wrote a poetry volume, and some people know him when he was working at Najah and he was a student 2001, 2005, and some people knew him while he was in the national campaign, and he spoke about the issue of representation and the Palestinian scattering situation, and he will speak about the issue. I'll give him 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll move to the other gentleman. Okay, good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit more of a practical nature on the Palestinian youth and the national representation. I'm not going to talk within terms and definitions. I'll try to involve the you in my practical experience in the youth area. As Ibrahim said, that it was mainly from between 2000 2005, which are the years of Intifada. That was my university life period. When we talk about youth and Intifada, then there is a very strong linkage. Youth traditionally are considered as the fuel of resistance. And the fuel of revolution, as it is said. But what I have seen at that era, that the youth were not just the fuel who sacrificed for liberty, but they had the capacity in a distinguished way to shoulder the responsibility of that era. Not just on the technical level, as Ibrahim said, referring to the crisis that that youth are facing now, but it really exceeded that to the level of vision. What are we looking at as active youth in resistance? Now, after Nablus, and after I came to Ramallah, and after mixing with various youth activities, and to extend a little bit more and to elaborate more than what Basil said, I had the opportunity in Ramallah to travel to various areas, whether Arab regions or in the world, and to deal with the Palestinian youth. There was always a question that was always imposed. What is that gathering the Palestinian youth in addition to the age and cultural tendencies and all these definitions? The feeling of responsibility towards a national cause is the thing that really distinguished Palestinian youth, and this was tangible through the 2 or 3 past years. When we talk about the catastrophe of Nahr al-Barid, the refugee camp, and the role of Palestinian youth there in taking care of the inhabitants and providing them with assistance, someone may say that this is more of a humanitarian thing and not political thing, but at the same time, when we go and see what happened in Al Yarmouk refugee camp and the demolition of that refugee camp and the response of the youth with the basic needs of the Palestinian people there. And then when we come back to the West Bank and see the issue of prisoners who really shouldered the cause of prisoners and pushed forward in order to make it the core of attention on the Arab and international level, then we can see. And a week ago, the Qalandia refugee camp and the events there, and watching the performance of the youth there, we can also notice something. I will go back to the term that we use, the Palestinian youth movement that started on the 15th of March. And I want to conclude at the end by talking about the idea of national representation and the campaign for national council registration as one of the activities that the youth took an active part and to shoulder that campaign. In particular, regarding the Palestinian youth movement, most of the participants in that movement know well that the main pillar of the movement is youth, a group of youth, party youth who do not represent the party, who the party performance no more represent their vision and their insight in the national issue. In addition to a group of youth for whom the Palestinian political faction or party was never an attraction for their activity. And therefore, regarding the youth, regarding the movement, and regarding the most youth movements and activities that covered most of the areas where the Palestinian people are, and dealt with each population center separately. What was gathering all these youth is the spirit of initiative and the spirit of responsibility. I believe, in fact, that the Palestinian Revolution and all the Palestinian activity historically was based on the feeling of responsibility and the capability to take initiative and to deal with the changing and developing situations. Let's move here to the idea of the national representation. In fact, categorizing the youth was always present on various levels. But after 2011, this term was promoted after the Arab Spring revolutions. This term was started to be dealt with the new dimensions. I personally don't really trust the Western categorization, because the Western media focuses on the youth who are feeling or are dreaming of a change and who are revolting against the existing situation. But part of that vision was not just in that the youth are revolting against the present situation, but there is a hereditary ideas that we are wanted to stand against. Youth, defining the youth, as Basil said, there is no specific limits for considering people as youth or elderly. There is nothing that can delineate where this energy disappears or appears. So, in fact, away from this categorization, we as people, we are an extension. The youth, the experience and the cultural vision of the youth is related to the society that they live in with all its components. Therefore, dividing the society within this categorization and specifying the youth within certain categories, as we can see today, that in such a podium, the youth were brought to talk about the youth issue in a separate session. But through my dealing with the youth here and everywhere, and attending the conference yesterday and watching most of the activities in which the future, past and present of the national cause, we as youth, we have an estimation that many of the names were capable to be within these frameworks and to provide and to contribute in all these occasions, and can prove that they are able to shoulder the responsibility and provide initiatives and solutions. So I always feel that there is always a problem in how the society deals with youth and categorizes them. And a few last years, this this difference, or this was even much established from various angles. But if we have to take into consideration again that the Palestinian youth movement is not just restricted to a group of youth who come out in Ramallah to the street in Ramallah to tackle clear issues and specific issues. There are many movements that could be gathered, and they could all be considered as a response for the needs of youth in the various gatherings. There's a problem and there is a controversy based on our practical experience that the society is looking us as the savior. And we youth are requested to solve the current situation, whether through violence or through other institutional, but through violence and through institutional efforts, we are being excluded, and we are being put within certain determinants that do not allow us to express our ideas and to have a practical performance. So there is an initiative for creating a parallel PLC, Palestinian Legislative Council, through which the youth will be trained for political performance and participation and etc. In one of the programs, we were with the Moroccan youth who elaborated on the experience of youth in Morocco in creating a parallel legislative council and parallel cabinet even. And why the question is here, why should it be parallel, and within what context should it be parallel? So through this parallelism, I can accumulate experience and can really, this will help me to carry on my national responsibility. If we are to talk about categorization and definitions, the Palestinian people are youngful people. The majority of the people are youth. And we are not restricted to certain categories that are just subjected to study. We are youth, and what I want to move to talk about in general is the registration for the Palestinian National Council, the campaign for registration for the Palestinian National Council that promotes the representation of the Palestinian people wherever they are in the national institution. As I said at the beginning, youth, when they moved basically on the 15th of March, and in the catastrophe anniversary of the Nakba anniversary disaster. And when they moved within the party frameworks, they moved according to the same ideas and the basic principles that for the sake of which these frameworks and these parties was created. Where these frameworks and parties stand now, this is not our issue today, but if we are to talk about the old age and the new age, or the new age, they all agree that return to Palestine and liberating Palestine and gathering the Palestinian people again in Palestine in order to exercise their self-determination. This is taken for granted and it's agreed upon. And there is no difference among various generations of the Palestinian people. Those who watch the Kalandia refugee camp, and this is the point that I stood at for long. We as Palestinian youth, when we sit down and to discuss deep ideological things and practical procedural things on the ground, we were not able to reflect the image that existed in the Kalandia refugee camp a few days ago. We know the camp, the youth, women and men, elderly and young from various political factions, and we know the differences. But when the occupation army came into the camp, there was a unity of objective, unity of performance, unagreed upon harmony, and it was more of a natural one, unplanned natural one that was practiced So this, we don't have to look into categories that divide us into political or social or age like groups. Some people as youth. Someone we can say that see that we are talking about institutional framework, about structures. Some people may say that some people or some young people may say that these frameworks brought us to this disastrous situation that we are in. Much can be said about this, but the main idea here is restoring this national institution, restoring the people once again, so that it will be able to reflect the determination and will of the people and their vision for the future, whether for the young people or for other sectors of the Palestinian people. The mechanisms of the campaign themselves, and that we can look at that were mentioned in a pamphlet that was issued in cooperation with the muwatin regarding restoring of the sovereignty of the people. It talks about our relation as young people with the older generation, with what it represents, and with the national institution. And I believe there is a vacuum and there is a lack of knowledge among us as young people and between us and the national institution regarding the objectives and the mechanisms of our national institution. All these things are absent to us. When we go to the street nowadays, we try one way or another to deal with the responsibilities that we shoulder. But always we collide with the reality, the procedures and measures and traditions and how things are carried out in the real life. What we need as youth, and as Ibrahim said, and as Basil tries to do, I am in need to understand my history. And now, after reaching such impasse that we are all facing, not just a specific group without the others, no, then maybe there are groups that try not to see this impasse or to circumvent it, but we are all facing this impasse, and dealing with this impasse starts with understanding the reality, our understanding of the history that brought us to such a situation in order to be able to build something for the future. Thank you.
شكرا حافظ.
Thank you, Hafez.
يعني اللي كان معنا من الصبح عم بلاحظ انه شوي
Those who have arrived early in the morning will notice that gradually we are trying to place the pieces of the puzzle together. What Basil has said in the beginning about the proactive depression and the definition of the youth was complemented by half speaking of the youth as part of the whole and the bottleneck that we all live in. And the most important indicator to this, if we look at the Palestinian parties today, all of the leaderships, those who are still alive, up to those who martyred, Abu Ammar, George Habash, Ishqaqi, and others, they were young when they began. The beginning of Fatah was from a student council that represented Palestine. George Habash used to be in the American University of Beirut. They were young. What happened today is different. We have the same people who have been there for at least 20 years. This is a collective crisis. Before that, there was room for the Palestinian youth to innovate and create and get out of the stereotypes. Today, there is suppression. Yes, there is responsibility laid upon the youth. And when we criticize the experience, the first people we criticize are ourselves. And therefore, this is not dissociating from our responsibilities, but do not label the youth as a single group, because the problem of the youth is part of the whole agreement. In the same way that the economy is part of the holistic political agreement, and so is the case for the cultural impression, which is part of the political problem. So the youth are facing the least of which is called a crisis. And now we have our last speaker, Dr. Abdul Razak At-Takriti, who is an assistant teacher of international history at the University of Sheffield in Great Britain. He has a PhD from the University of Oxford, for which he received the award of Malcolm Kerr for the best PhD research about the Middle East in North America. He has a Lee Douglas Award for the best PhD research in Great Britain, and finally he published the Muslim Revolution, published by Oxford University Press. Abdulrazak will complete our talks focusing on the youth, and then we will conclude and leave room for your interventions. Thank you, Ibrahim. In fact, I feel like the ugly duckling today because I'm not going to speak of the youth today. The question of the youth, in my opinion, when we speak of the diaspora, is the question that reflects the broader problems that have been tackled here. And I believe that the biggest dilemma here is the question of citizenship. A while ago, there was a Masarat conference in which I had addressed this issue, and I felt that there is no conceptualization per se of this issue of the youth. And today I would like to elaborate more on this issue and present some historical models which may illustrate better this definition. When we speak of citizenship and its crisis in the diaspora, before we delve into this issue, we need to define citizenship, because I believe that we have a distorted meaning of citizenship which has evolved as a result of Oslo in particular, but also as a result of the outspread of specific norms that connect citizenship to the statehood. A citizen to us is a person who holds a passport of a certain state. Is a person goes to a certain state with certain privileges in the state or access to a certain type of services provided in the state. They can vote in their institutions. They can exercise governance by their citizenship or nationality. But in the Palestinian people, this excludes the majority of our people, even those in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Their citizenship is incomplete to a large extent, and those outside the West Bank and Gaza Strip who do not have a government, which is Palestinian as labeled, they will not be taken into account. This vision of citizenship was consolidated under Oslo very largely with the shift of the important weight of Palestinian action from the diaspora into the Palestinian territory. And in my opinion, this reflects a concept that did not exist in the past. Although most of the Palestinian discussions in the past did not focus on citizenship, but the concept of citizenship is different, which is demised on the exercise of this citizenship, and it existed because people were actually exercising their citizenship on the ground, even without the presence of a government or passports or any type of these formalized relations. They were exercising citizenship as being a relationship between the individuals of the same people and the way they were thinking about their cause and the responsibilities vis-a-vis this cause and the role. Citizens believe they have rights in the formulation of policies. We have to look at the Athenian understanding of citizenship, which is one of the Aristophanes expressed, defining citizen as a person who has the right to take part in the consultative and judicial power of the society. So those who draft legislation are citizens, but not a person who holds a passport and relates to a government. So the question of citizenship is preceded the concept of the nation state as we understand it, because to us today it's a number of bureaucratic institutions who have a certain type of relationship to the individuals they govern. The most important pillars is to have a monopoly over the use of violence and so on. Of course, there are different definitions, like the Weber definition, and there are many other definitions, but in general, the state is modern. But citizenship is a much more antique definition that brings us back to the days of Athens or even before that. And it demises on this ideology that people who have the right to draft the policies of the society are citizens, unlike those who are deprived of this right to the formulation of policies. If we review the era of the 50s in the Palestinian context, there was a conflict for citizenship de facto. The Palestinians in the diaspora were deprived from the right to formulate policies and the so-called self-determination at that era. At that time, their core cause focused on gaining this right, re-establishing their right. They were reorganizing themselves for the struggle for liberation as a priority, but through this organization, they were de facto fighting for their right to citizenship, to play a role in protecting their cause and in endorsing the stream or the line that should be adopted by this cause. In the 1960s, this climate evolved with the emergence of the PLO, and we shifted from the 1950s, in which there were several important factors of citizenship, most importantly the existence of organizational access in which every individual could exercise his or her Palestinian national identity by becoming organized with other Palestinians and raise clans or try to be armed or mobilize their effort or be trained to gain these demands. There was diversified beliefs, but they were not organized in the 50s and there were no national structures. But in the 60s, there were beginnings of the formation of all-in national structures under which the citizenship can be framed, which I reiterate were not related or relevant to the state. It was relevant to how you see this yourself. Do you, as Palestinian, have the right to formulate policies and take part in the self-determination of yourself and your people? In the 1960s, there were interesting experiences when people started to hear that Ahmed al-Shikori was delegated by the Arab League to contact the Palestinian diaspora and communities. These communities started to organize themselves to seek a way of representation. In Kuwait, for instance, the Palestinian community of Kuwait organized a number of mobilizations in the early 1964, in which they established contacts and estimated that there was about 31,000 employees in the different ministries in Kuwait, and they decided to organize a conference with all of these people or their representatives. They actually organized themselves and divided a representative for the employee of every ministry, in which case there were elections for the employees of every ministry to nominate their representative candidate. For example, there were 5,000 people working in the Ministry of Education, and they decided that 100 delegates will be representing them in the Kuwait conference. The number of those working in the public works and electricity, they will be represented by 60 delegates, and so on. When they conducted this operation, they elected representatives for themselves. And when Ahmad Shaqiri came to Kuwait, they says these are our spokespersons. And when the Palestinian National Conference organized at this time, these people will be the representatives of the Palestinians of Kuwait. There were similar mobilizations in other areas in Gaza, for example. There were broad elections at that moment. Not in all places of residence under West Bank and Jordan. It was difficult under Jordanian rule. But the idea is that people had the understanding that they have to get organized on their own. And I, as a Palestinian, although I live in the diaspora, although I am abroad, I still have the right to make decisions and be represented in a way that reflects the status of my community in the diaspora and my aspirations for Palestine. This type of exercise of citizenship was possible in the 1960s because there was nothing that would fill in this horizon, or actually, sorry, block this horizon at the Palestinian and in regional and international levels. Nothing impeded those youth, at the time they were mostly youth, to mobilize in this direction. Today, we have a different situation, and I will come to this point in a minute. But I want to build on what I said, that this case has evolved notwithstanding it did not preserve the principle of elections, but evolved into other forms, in which case the Palestinian organizations as a whole were broadened. And through their organization or party, the citizens were contributing. Nobody was non-partisan, or there was no organization that did not play a role. There was a whole Palestinian system that we can call at that time. It was an internal Palestinian system in which everybody had the right to participate. And it was seldom that you would find a Palestinian family that doesn't have a representative of this family inside this framed organization or system. This system enabled the Palestinians of the diaspora to play a role and act upon their cause. Sometimes it was a military role, to the extent that after the 1967 war, the youth of Germany were mobilized in Fatah, and a big group of them went to fight. And the youth in the USA in the mid-1960s, they were receiving training in the military academy of Algeria. In the 70s, there was the cohabitation system in which students used to travel abroad as fidayin or militants. It's like being recruited by the army in any state. But it was a volunteer action in which people had this conscience that they can play the role of citizens. So it was from below citizenship and not imposed by the existence of the state. The people mobilized themselves on their own. But things changed. Later on, especially after the war in Lebanon in 1982, as a result first of the collapse of the organizational system abroad, and the role was weakened in the diaspora, and therefore the potential for down-up organization was fading away. And then also the depletion of the national structures that were all in structures also locked many doors in the face of many Palestinians to express and exercise the citizenship. But the devastating fact was the appearance of a new definition of citizenship after Oslo, in which case a Palestinian citizen is only the one living in the West Bank and Gaza. If you have a Palestinian identity card, you are a citizen. Even if you're a Palestinian in the 1948 land, You are still on the land of historical Palestine, but you're not a citizen because the Palestinian citizen now is defined by those holding the Palestinian ID card. So if we look at the level of our institutions, this is what's taking place now. And this resulted from creating the parallel frames of the PLO, which are the Palestinian National Authority and the Palestinian Legislative Council, and making them exit the authority of the PLO. In theory, they were supposed to be under the umbrella of the PLO as its branch operating here for specific reasons related to the agreements. They are supposed to remain under this encompassing arch that should include all of the Palestinians wherever they existed as people having the right to be integrated under this umbrella. But this presence of this parallel frame in which all of the institutions, funds, and so on were shifted to, it created a distortion that excluded the Palestinians abroad in the diaspora and distorted the meaning of citizenship for them. The Palestinian communities themselves start to say citizens are those in the West Bank and Gaza. We're supporters, we're solidarity people. So Palestinian expatriates start to become solidarity groups with the other Palestinians. And this is a kind of distortion that's taking place. So I believe that this distortion in concepts and definitions can be summarized in 4 core points. First, in delimiting the concept of citizenship within a narrow geographic area, being the Palestinian living in the